Longtime residents of Ufa, as well as those who visited the city 20, 30, or even 40 years ago, might recall a popular saying, "If we have money, we party in Ufa. If we're broke, we stay in Chishmi." Chishmi is a small urban-type settlement about 50 kilometers from the center of what used to be the Bashkir ASSR. In the mid-20th century, a modest cafe in the historic part of the city bore the same name. It was located in the backyard of the luxurious Ufa restaurant, considered quite fancy at the time. The close proximity between the restaurant and the cafe gave birth to the saying. Many still believe it was coined by Chishmi residents. They considered it a special treat to head to the capital after payday or a successful gig to have a good time. On the other hand, some preferred to visit Ufa to earn money or persuade the affluent city dwellers to share their wealth. Early in the fall of 1990, all traffic police posts in Penza received an urgent telex: detain a speeding Zhiguli car on the federal highway within the region. Inspectors at one checkpoint noticed the car with out-of-town plates speeding excessively. They tried to stop it, but the driver ignored the order. This raised suspicions among the officers. Soon, all on-duty inspectors were informed of the suspicious vehicle's features. Before long, another stationary traffic post detected the fast-moving car. The inspectors stepped onto the road, but the driver ignored the stop order again. The police got into their patrol car and gave chase. The officer on duty reported the incident to headquarters and requested backup from a nearby village. The driver refused to stop and instead increased speed, eventually losing the pursuers. The car disappeared behind a bend and was out of sight for a few minutes. However, it wasn't long before the police spotted the abandoned vehicle in a field near the road. Where had the occupants gone? It was unlikely they had reached the nearby forest, as it was several kilometers away, and the officers had only lost sight of the car briefly. A few haystacks stood in the field. The inspectors approached them, and suddenly, gunshots rang out. The shootout was short-lived and ended in a decisive victory for law enforcement. 4 men from Chishmi, Bashkiria, had instigated the police chase. All were detained that day, and their apprehension was promptly reported to the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the Bashkir ASSR. The items found in the car immediately caught the attention of Bashkir investigators. The vehicle contained several rolls of genuine leather, 5 boxes of cassette tapes, shoes for both men and women, various small items like an umbrella, gloves, French cosmetics, and even a prestigious and rare Funai TV set, albeit broken, likely damaged when the car swerved off the road abruptly. The description of these items matched those reported stolen in 2 criminal cases that Ufa detectives were working on. Both cases had been opened 4 days before the Penza police caught the Chishmi bandits. Igor Dergach, Andrei Pestsov, Revkat Byburin, and Vaner Baikov, aged 25 to 32, had all previously been convicted of theft, robbery, and minor hooliganism. However, this time they were suspected of committing particularly serious crimes as part of an organized criminal group. 4 days before their capture, a high-profile murder shocked downtown Ufa. Returning from lunch, employees of a cooperative found their director dead. 33-year-old Gennady Kuplinov had died from multiple stab and slash wounds. The motive for the brutal crime was clear. Almost all the property of the cooperative, which specialized in tanning hides and making leather goods, had been stolen. It took detectives until morning to examine the crime scene and catalog the stolen items. But they were soon called to another neighborhood, following a report of an attack on another cooperative member's apartment. The owner was out of town, leaving his wife and their 7-year-old son at home. The robbers rang the doorbell, claiming to have a package from her husband. When she opened the door, 4 bandits burst in, tied her up, and demanded all the valuables in the apartment. They tortured her while one took the boy to the bathroom to keep him out of the ordeal. That same man later insisted they spare the woman and her child. What made the criminal show mercy? Nonetheless, he actively participated in the robbery. The husband's cooperative produced albums of popular artists and films, so the house was full of equipment and tapes. The bandits took everything. 4 days later, the stolen goods of the Ufa cooperators were found in a car with Bashkirian license plates driven by armed men. The captured criminals were taken to Bashkiria, but they were reluctant to confess. However, investigators were confident that their guilt in the murder of one cooperator and the robbery of another's family would be proven. They found the victims' belongings, along with firearms and knives, which experts needed to analyze to see if they were used to kill Kuplinov. Additionally, the surviving wife of the video magnate could identify her tormentors. Detectives were relentless in pursuing the bandits, especially after the gruesome murder of 3 people in Ufa's forest parks. On June 9, 1990, in Ufa, the team of criminal investigators and prosecutors had to begin their work before the typical workday started. A couple enjoying the early morning in the quiet city wandered into a park. In the depths of the forest, their romantic stroll took a grim turn when they discovered 2 bodies, a man and a woman, tied to trees and brutally stabbed. The sight was horrifying. After calming his terrified girlfriend, the young man called the police. An emergency investigative team arrived promptly, followed by law enforcement leaders from local and republic levels. It quickly became clear that no professional would be superfluous at the crime scene that day. While combing the area, detectives discovered another dead body. A young, beautiful, completely naked woman with 16 stab wounds, one directly to the heart. Near the body, they found no identifying documents or even clothing to describe in a wanted notice. Nevertheless, they quickly identified the victim as Svetlana Badikshanova, a 27-year-old mother of 2. She had been missing for a day, according to local detectives. Recently divorced, she lived with her 32-year-old partner, Fedor Slavin, a cooperator. The identities of the other 2 victims, 23-year-old Lilia Belkina and 39-year-old Vyacheslav Perezhogin, were established soon after. Colleagues, they had been on a business trip and were expected back 2 days prior. They might have had a significant amount of money, which the killers likely stole. Perezhogin's car was also missing. The times of death for these individuals and Svetlana did not coincide. She died almost a day later. Interviews with their relatives and friends revealed no common acquaintances or business interests. But why did they die in this forest? Svetlana disappeared with her partner from their home the previous evening. Her brother raised the alarm. He visited the couple's apartment in the morning, finding it odd that no one answered the door despite the early hour. Peeking through a window, he saw the gas stove burners on, but was reassured they might be in the bathroom. Then he noticed a man's boot print on the pristine windowsill. Deciding to use his key, he entered the apartment and immediately sensed something terrible had happened. The place was in chaos, with stolen electronics, blood, and knocked-out teeth. Svetlana was later found brutally murdered, and Fedor was missing. Her children were safe at their grandmother's. The ex-husband, who had been jealous even after their divorce, became the first suspect. He was held for 3 days, but was devastated by the news of Svetlana's death. With no evidence linking him to the crime, he was released. The attack might have been related to Fedor's work. In the early 90s, the USSR passed a law allowing private enterprise, enabling bold citizens like Fedor Slavin to challenge the state in the market. He sold electronics and seemed to live well, potentially attracting unwanted attention from those who believed in sharing wealth. This principle dated back to the 60s, when Chehoviki, white-collar criminals, emerged in the USSR. Despite private enterprise being illegal, they ran underground operations or set up illicit channels to sell scarce goods from state factories. Criminal authorities observed these processes and decided that secret millionaires had to share their wealth, if not with the state, then with the bandits. Those who refused to pay were given harsh lessons. Their homes and cars were set ablaze, they were tortured, and their wives and children were kidnapped. With the passage of the law on cooperatives, anyone interested could legally start their own business. However, sooner or later, stern men would show up demanding money to protect cooperators from other equally stern men who also wanted to live lavishly at someone else's expense. They often used the same persuasive methods as the opponents of the underground entrepreneurs of the 60s and 70s. However, according to experts, they were as far from true organized crime as a vegetable stall owner is from an oil refinery tycoon. Could Fyodor Slavin and Sveta Badikchanova have fallen victim to such thugs? Where was the cooperator when his girlfriend was murdered? What happened to him? Why can't he be found alive or dead? One of Slavin's colleagues informed the investigators that it seemed Slavin had managed to escape and had been spotted in Moscow. The informer, known as the Colonel, had once worked in Slavin's cooperative. Despite his nickname, he had no affiliation with the armed forces or law enforcement. His friends nicknamed him due to his last name, Isaev, like Stierlitz, which led to Colonel. The Colonel came under the detectives' radar while they were investigating Slavin's circle. One detective noticed the Colonel's birthplace while reviewing his passport. The Colonel convincingly told how mutual acquaintances had seen Slavin safe and sound in Moscow. However, he couldn't provide the exact address, but promised to gather more information. The Colonel called the investigator with a new report a day after a group led by Dergach was transported from Penza to Ufa. He mentioned that another acquaintance had seen Slavin in Moscow, unharmed. Just as the conversation was about to end, the investigator remembered something. The Colonel was from the same hometown as the murder suspects. Perhaps he had heard rumors about their exploits. The investigator directly asked, "Do you know Dergach? Do you know Pestov?" There was silence and fear on the other end of the line. The investigator hung up and immediately went to his superiors. Along with the head of the police department, they went to the temporary detention facility to speak with Pestov. They asked if he knew Fyodor Slavin. Pestov grimly shook his head. Then the chief took a gamble. "Send him regards from the Colonel," he said. Supposedly, the Colonel had already begun talking about the case. Pestov broke down and soon confessed to all the crimes he and his friends had committed. Living in Chishmy, they barely made ends meet with modest earnings and minor offenses. But they dreamed of a big score. One day, a fellow townsman who had long moved to Ufa told them about a former boss, a wealthy man with plenty to steal. Pestov didn't know why the Colonel decided to become an informant. Perhaps it was revenge for being fired. Regardless, to the soon-to-be killer, it didn't matter. He informed Dergach about Slavin, and the friends eagerly planned the attack on the cooperator's apartment. On June 7, 1990, they set out to kill Fyodor. Incidentally, Bykov and Byburan, also arrested in Penza, were not yet part of the gang. On that day, Dergach and Pestov were joined by 29-year-old Radik Kafizov and 30-year-old Sultan Karamov. But on the way into the city, the friends got into an accident, damaging a car also headed to Ufa. The angry driver demanded money for repairs, threatening to call the traffic police and noting their car's license plate number. This driver was Vyacheslav Perezhogin, returning from a business trip with his young colleague, Lilia Belkina. The criminals didn't plan on exposing themselves to the Ufa police. To avoid leaving witnesses, they killed both of them. To avoid drawing attention, they pretended to agree to compensate Perezhogin. They claimed they had no money but knew a good auto repair shop and offered to take the victims there. Dergach, Pestov, and Karimov got into Vyacheslav's car, locked the doors, pulled out knives, and ordered him to drive to their specified location. Upon reaching the forest park at the city's border, they ordered them out of the car. They killed the man first. Dergach then brutally raped and killed the young woman by stabbing her in the heart. The city slept as the killers arrived at Slavin's house. In the night between June 7th and 8, 1990, a group of criminals broke into an apartment through an open kitchen window. They attacked the sleeping residents, Fyodor and Svetlana. The intruders brutally beat Fyodor, demanding all the money and car documents they had in the house. After obtaining what they wanted and gathering all the valuable electronics, they decided it would be better not to kill the couple in the apartment. They loaded their victims into a car and drove out of town. Killing Fyodor turned out to be more challenging than expected. Pestsov, Karimov, and Hafizov took him into the forest. They tried to tie him to a tree, but he managed to break free and run away. The criminals chose not to wander through the dark forest and returned to the car. While driving back, they saw a man waving his arms in the headlights, signaling them to stop. It was Fyodor Slavin, hoping for help from passing drivers. The criminals attempted to run him over, but Fyodor dashed into the woods. They eventually caught up with him and finished him off with a knife. Svetlana spent the entire night in the car with the bandits. By dawn, they took her to the site of a recent execution of Vyacheslav Perezhogin and Lili Belkina. After that night, Dergach and Pestsov concluded that killing wasn't as frightening as they had thought. Hafizov and Karimov decided to leave the gang. It wasn't difficult for the leaders to find new accomplices, eager for easy money. From their new recruits, they learned about Gennady Kuplanov's cooperative and the wealthy apartment of a tape trader who was away on a business trip. Following Pestsov's confession, the other gang members also began to talk, primarily incriminating each other. This cooperation was beneficial for the investigation, providing a comprehensive picture of the crimes committed. However, the four main criminals, responsible for 4 brutal murders, had little hope for leniency. The Supreme Court of the Bashkir ASSR found the gang members guilty of all charges. Baikov and Bayburan avoided the death penalty, while Dergach, Pestsov, Hafizov, and Karimov were sentenced to the maximum punishment.